Welcome to Resilient Minds 365, where we discuss the resilient stories of entrepreneurs, professionals, and students with mental illnesses to encourage you to strive, thrive, and live in abundance. I'm your host, Cleoni Crawford. Today, guys, we have a special guest with us. His name is Jay Shifman. Who is Jay Shifman? Well, Jay Shifman is a public speaker, he's a coach, and he's the host of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. He interviews people with lived experience on the topics of mental health, substance misuse and recovery, and drug use and policy to help end stigma and normalize difficult conversations through empathy and vulnerability. With that said, I present to you Jay Shifman. Hi, Jay.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No problem, no problem. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your profession, how long you've been doing it, and yeah, what it entails.
Yeah, well, I'd say the easiest way to describe my profession is I love talking about difficult topics. That's what makes me happy. I've been doing this work for about 5 years. I've been doing it full time for the last two. I was doing it on the side for about 3 years, and thanks to a career coach of mine, she was helping me understand that I was living under a lot of limiting beliefs. I was saying, oh, I could never do this full time, blah blah blah. And what's ridiculous about that is that that's a lot of what Choose Your Struggle stands for, and I didn't even realize that I was doing it myself. So I launched this business in 2000 or January of 2019. I've been doing it full time ever since. And this has been a really interesting year for this work. It's been a year that's caused me to pivot because, as a public speaker, obviously, that does not exist in 2020. So that's been difficult, but it's really allowed me to get back to my why and make sure that I was always doing things that were helping others. And, when you do that, you really can't go wrong.
Definitely, definitely. So I know with public speaking, that's actually something I'm going into as well. I'm learning about the business of public speaking. It has been a bit challenging, but there are a lot of one thing that 2020 has definitely opened up for public speakers is virtual events.
Hmm.
So a lot of people have been doing a lot of virtual events, which is interesting. But people have had to do a lot of pivoting with that part of the business, which is interesting. So, with that said, we're going to dive right into the interview. And so, we're going to ask it. First question is, what is your mental health diagnosis and when were you diagnosed?
Yeah, so that's a sort of a tricky one for me. I was diagnosed with ADHD as a preteen, and later had other things added to that, depression and anxiety, as unfortunately a lot of people are, OCD. Unfortunately for me, though, when I was in my mid-teens, my therapist saw sort of the perfect storm of, I was a kid with ADHD who was taking high levels of medication for that in the late 90s, which was when a lot of these drug companies were rolling out new things, and I was trying on all of them. When you take that and you add it to the normal experience of a kid going through puberty, and we all remember what that was like, and then on top of that, a person with some mental health struggles, it creates a perfect storm. And my therapist, instead of seeing this, said, it seems to me that these are signs of a larger issue. Unfortunately, he was wrong, but he gave me the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, which I lived with for the
Wow.
next decade or so. Um, Now, like I said, that was a misdiagnosis, which is something it took me a decade to realize. But for a long time, I was on all these medications. And unfortunately for me, not only did it not make me better, but I was looking around and other people were getting better with this, and I was getting worse. And that's really what led to my spiral and my downfall.
Wow. Interesting. So maybe you can go into telling us a little bit deeper into your mental health story of resilience. What did you have to do to kind of come back from your lowest points and everything?
Yeah, so my lowest point was really a year long. In the summer of 2009, I attempted suicide twice. I overdosed the second time. I spent 3 weeks in a lockdown unit, 3 months in a long term care facility. And it wasn't until leaving that long term care facility that I really started to come back up. But what I see as my actual rock bottom moment was the day after I left that long-term care facility. And I set out to drive cross country from the Berkshires in Massachusetts, where I was at this long-term care facility, to Arizona, where I was going to live with my grandparents. And that's where I ended up going through detox. But a day into this journey, I was passing through New York City, and I got T-boned by a cab, and it bent the rear driver's side wheel of my car completely inwards. Now I know what most people think. Oh well, he put it in a shop, and it took him another week to get. Nope, I decided to keep going on my road trip, even though my car could barely drive. Not the greatest decision in a life of a lot of questionable decisions. So that next day, I'm driving through a blizzard in Pennsylvania, and if you've never driven through these hills, they're giant, and there are these holes cut through the mountains that are barely big enough for a car and a truck. And here I am holding my car, going forward on three wheels, really on willpower alone. I blew that tire and I spun out into a ditch at one point. I had to walk a mile on the highway. And finally, after driving for probably 10 hours and making it only what should have taken me 4 hours, I gave up and I pulled off into a small town called Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And I'll never forget Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And it was January 2nd of 2010. And I pulled into this dirty truck stop motel. And that's where I really consider my rock bottom moment, because I was all alone. I had just made this giant leap to check myself out of the long-term care facility. And I did what a lot of people who struggle with substance misuse or mental health do. And I reached out to a higher power, and nobody came. And that's when I really felt, okay, I am more alone than I ever thought possible. But after this breakdown, I decided, you know what? If I'm going to get better, I'm going to put my recovery on my back, because I'm the only one I got. It's going to come down to me. And if I don't do this, it's not going to happen. And the next day I got up and rented a car and continued on my road trip and went through detox. It took me almost 4 months to do step down detox, and never stopped. It kept moving forward from there, repairing my life, rebuilding my life. And now I'm at a point where for the last 5 years, I've dedicated myself to this mission of ending the stigma around these issues and making sure the people who were, in the same place that I was are getting the help that they deserve.
Wow, it's amazing. So tell me a little bit more about your experience in the mental health ward. How is it like? What are some good things, bad things? I'm interested.
Well, so I saw sort of both sides of this, right? The 3 weeks in the lockdown unit were very different than my 3 months in the long-term care facility. And the lockdown unit, honestly, it's what you see in the movies isn't that wrong. There are some that are absurd, but if you watch the movie, it's kind of a funny story, which I showed it to my wife not long ago, because she'd asked this question too. What was it like being in lockdown? And I showed her this movie and I said, this is similar. I mean, they get this right. It's the kind of thing that you can't wear a belt. You have no shoelaces. You shower with the door open because they're afraid you may kill yourself. But there's also friendships. There's also, I don't. I wish I could say that I got better there, and I didn't. But what I did do is get to know other incredible people, and we were all in that together for 3 weeks. I was really relying on these people. Coincidentally enough, there's a young woman that I've become friends with in England who is currently on a lockdown unit, and we've been exchanging Facebook messages. And I feel so strongly for her, because it's bringing back memories for me about being there. And so I sent her some stuff like Sudoku and word find magazines and stuff like that really help days in there, because you got to keep your mind going, or it's very easy to be sucked down into holy shit, look at where I am, and that depression will get you. And I remember there was a young woman. I used to be an athlete, and I was a young woman who was on a college basketball team who was also in there, and we petitioned to get the gym open so she and I could play one-on-one, and stuff like that, where it was just finding any way we could between group sessions and meetings with our therapist to keep our minds off of where our lives were. Because if you sort of step back, it's really easy to go, how the hell did I get here?
Wow. I can definitely understand what it is to be in a mental health ward and in lockdown. I've been in the because I have bipolar, so I've been hospitalized actually 26 times.
Mm.
So I've definitely had the experience, and being in lockdown, it's yeah, the movies sometimes are correct. The things that you see, it's, where they do take off your shoelaces and your belts, and you can't have any sharp things. You can't
Mm-hmm.
have any cameras. Um, so you can't have your phone because your phone has a camera.
Right.
You know what I mean? And yeah, and then you have to wear the same clothes that everyone else is wearing, and it's just, yeah, it's not, it's funny, like you said, that you didn't necessarily get better in there, but i I personally think that the hospitals are not necessarily the best place for people with mental health challenges to get them better. Like for some people, it's a good way to kind of just get a break from things, but I don't know if they're necessarily the best place for rehabilitation. I
I
think.
I definitely agree. I like I said, I kind of got both sides of this. That the lockdown, it was very strict, and it is a wonderful place if you've reached a point where you are a danger to yourself.
Yes.
Having somebody be put there for a short amount of time, there are worse things. Now, when I was at the long-term care facility, and by the way, I say long-term care facility because we don't use the word mental institution anymore. But when I was there, now this was one of the nicest places in the country for these facilities. It's in the
Mm-hmm.
Berkshires in Massachusetts. It's a very beautiful setting. It's where Norman Rockwell is from, this small town. So if you picture his sort of idyllic American, paintings, that's what this town looked like. But it was a place of incredible suffering because you get there and it's almost like, it's open ended, and it's really if you've made it to this point, you're in a really rough spot. And nobody there is in a great place because we're all stuck together and we're all making the best of it. Again, I met some incredible people, some of whom I still talk to, and we did things like watch football games and play outside, and we had an art department and a workshop, and all of those things are happening, but there's your just normal base level of happiness is way lower because you're every day waking up and going, how the hell did I get here, and how do I get out of this? And
Mm-hmm.
there are people that get better there are people who never leave there, and there are some who don't survive. And it is a very traumatic place, and it's something that I've spent years since dealing with my experience being in this uh, facility. And so the way that our country sort of handles issues of mental health and substance misuse is just downright terrible. And
Yeah.
hopefully we'll continue to make the small progress as we have the last couple of years. But I don't want to say I'm pessimistic, but I'm more like, let's show me you're gonna do this before I'll believe you.
Right, right. So you did mention that you were misdiagnosed with bipolar. What was that like, having those years of being misdiagnosed and um, I guess possibly taking medication for it? I'm assuming.
Yeah, my substance misuse was all around my medications for my bipolar disorder.
Ah, so what was it like? Explain to me what that whole period was like.
So in my mid-teens is when I got the diagnosis, and I started being treated for it as a 19-year-old, right before I left for college, 18, 19. And first it was, just we're going to try this and then we're going to try that. And that's how we kind of treat mental health goals. So let's try this thing. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try that thing. And
Mhm.
so as it got more and more, it got to a point where by the time I was 21, I was walking around with a backpack on everywhere I went. And that backpack was just full of pill canisters. And I've been asked before on these interviews, was there ever red flags? Because like I said, I had this diagnosis and I truly believed my diagnosis that I was bipolar, even though not only was I not getting better, I was getting worse because of all the medication.
Mm-hmm.
And there was red flags. In fact, the first one was I was going on a trip with my fraternity brothers, and I'm going through TSA in New York City. I think it was JFK.
Okay.
And I get pulled out of line and searched. And I mean, rubber glove searched. And it was because my backpack full of pill canisters had been a flag for them of, hey, this guy's a drug dealer. And it was
Right.
because there were so many pill canisters, they could not believe I wasn't a drug dealer. And I had to show them, look, my name is on all of them. The therapist who prescribes them is on all of them. This is not some ruse. These are my drugs. And they were like, there's no way. There's no way somebody's walking around on this many drugs. And that should have been an eye-opening experience, and it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I was so convinced of my own illness. And so by the time I'm 23, again, at this point, I've been living with this diagnosis for almost a decade. I've been treated for it for over half a decade, and I'm not getting better. It's easy to understand why I lost hope. I'm waking up every day and if I don't immediately take a handful of pills, I'm going through withdrawals. And the days that I don't do it quick enough, I spend the morning curled around my bathroom toilet, going, terrible withdrawal symptoms. And instead of getting better, like my therapist says I'm supposed to, I'm getting worse. And so that's why I finally lost hope. I said, you know what? This is my life. It's not going to get better, and I don't want to live this way.
Wow. So tell us more about I believe that when I was reading your bio, you talked about suicide attempts. So what happened? What were your triggers? What caused you to say, you know what? No, I'm done. And and what helped you to stop? What caused you to,
So,
yeah.
like I was saying, I had given up hope, but
Yeah.
I was, you know, those of us who struggle, it's very easy to think back on that period and only talk about the bad parts, but there were good too. That summer I'd spent about 6 weeks following a band that I loved around the country, basically living out of my car, in tents, and that was a wonderful period. And
Yes.
in those places, I was around people that made me feel accepted, right? Everybody is using a lot of drugs. Everyone's weird. Everyone is decked out in crazy clothes. I was having a wonderful time because I felt accepted there. And then that ends and I come home, and that's when I sort of have this realization that I've been doing this for half a decade now. I'm getting worse. I don't have a job. I'm not in school. My only friends that are still around me are the people that I'm struggling with drugs with. This isn't the life I want to live. And so I dumped out what I thought was going to be a lethal dosage of my medications on my computer. And I called a friend to tell her I was going to commit suicide. And luckily for me, she texted a couple other friends of ours who rushed over to stop me. And as I say when I speak, that could have been the end of my story. Like, look, I attempted suicide, I failed, and then I got better, but that wasn't the case. The next night, learning from my mistake the night before, I took the pills first and then called the exact same friend.
Wow.
And this time, she texted the same friends who said, we're going to call 911. And my last memory, because I was going through overdose, I had taken, basically an entire pill bottle worth of different medications. My last memory is a cop showing up at my house, because this is the United States and this is how we treat people struggling with mental health. I was put in handcuffs. I was let out of my house. And my last memory was a cop throwing me roughly into his back seat and having my head slammed into the side of his car because he missed throwing me in the back seat. And the next thing I remember was a day later, I sort of had a very movie-like experience where my consciousness rushed back at me, and I looked around, and I'm in scrubs, my shoes are gone, and I'm in the intake of this lockdown unit, and I literally said, where the fuck am I?
Yeah.
I'd spent the night before handcuffed to a bed at the hospital. I have like brief snippets of memories from that night, of like begging people to let me go, of like coming to handcuffed to a bed and like screaming, and then I'm out again, going through this overdose. But just having no idea what's going on around me, and had to be told everything that happened between that cop arresting me or taking me in and then arriving at this lockdown unit.
Wow. That is a very sad experience. That's horrible. Like, you would think, you would just think that someone who's sick, that you would bring an ambulance.
Yeah.
That would be the likely response, is that someone who's, you know, suffering from an overdose, that the ambulance would come, they would take them, they would check them out, they'd bring them to the hospital because
Right.
they're sick. And then from there, then maybe they would be brought to a psychiatric ward or whatever because of being assessed, not to jail. And that's the sad thing, is that people criminalize
Yeah.
people with mental health challenges when they should be, actually, maybe, I guess, either hospitalize them or treating them a bit better than what they're doing. It's crazy.
Yeah, I tell that story a lot, and I've started inserting sort of a warning beforehand. And what I ask of people when I tell this on stage is, I say, look, what I'm going to say today is probably going to upset you.
Yeah.
It's going to get emotions out of you. Now, I would like you to practice a little bit of mindfulness with me.
Yes.
When you are feeling this emotion, figure out why. Is it A, that you're upset by what I'm telling you, which is it's supposed to be? That is the goal of what I am telling you. Mm-hmm. Or is it B, that you truly believe that something I'm saying is incorrect? And then come talk to me, because I can't tell you how many times I told that story and people came up screaming at me afterwards. How dare you disparage the police? And it's like, look, I'm literally telling my story. I'm not disparaging anyone. That cop could have killed me, that I'm lucky that I got to the hospital. If I had actually gone into overdose in his back seat, 99 times out of 100, I would have died in the backseat of that cop car, right? Because he had no idea. It's not his fault. He had no idea how to save my life. Why was he there in the first place? Exactly. Our system is broken. And then, this a couple months ago, when there was a young man named Walter in Philadelphia who was murdered by the police while going through a struggle of mental health. And I posted about this, and I said, look, clearly, all you who've been telling me for years, that I was wrong, that things had gotten better, I could have been Walter. The only difference is that Walter is black and I'm white. My white skin saved me that night. If I was black, I would be Walter. I would be shot by the cops, or maybe the cop doesn't even take me straight to the hospital. Maybe he actually takes me to jail first, and I go through overdose in a jail cell. Who knows? All I know is that that cop shouldn't have been at my door in the first place. Our system is so broken that a 911 call of a person who just attempted suicide sends a cop instead of an ambulance. That's screwed up. And number two, you have two very similar circumstances. Me and Walter. I am a wealthy white guy. Walter is a guy living in poverty who is black. He dies. I live. One thing that isn't in common there is what I just described. You can't tell me the system isn't broken.
Yes, definitely. It's really sad. We spend way too much time criminalizing people with mental health challenges. Yep. I'm very sorry that you had to go through that. I can understand. I've had a situation as well for myself with the police, where I was having a breakdown, and rather than the ambulance being called, I was sent to jail. Mm-hmm. And it was just quite traumatic for me. But what they needed to have sent me, what needed to have happened is I needed to be in the hospital. Mm-hmm. Because I was having a breakdown, but they just didn't see that. They just saw me as a criminal. She was acting out of things, so therefore she needs to be in jail.
Right.
Which makes no sense at all.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. That is absolutely indefensible and just terrible.
Yeah, definitely. But you know what? I'm going to be hopeful. That in the next few years, with people like us telling our stories and being open, that there will be reform in the system and things will get better. So.
Well, we're definitely seeing small steps. I just literally right before I jumped on here read an article about how in Minnesota, they were attempting to defund the police after the terrible, terrible murder there in the spring. And of course, politics got in the way and that didn't happen. And they finally succeeded in moving $8 million from police budget to mental health instead. Now,
Wow.
yes, that is a wonderful victory. 8 million for mental health is 8 million that wasn't there yesterday. That's wonderful. Sadly, the police budget was 180 million. So you're
Wow.
talking not even, I mean, just minuscule amounts, right? So, and this, last year before all of this, I was at a conference for substance misuse, and President Trump was being applauded for giving money to this cause. And I pulled aside one of the organizers and I said, I got to ask you this question. Now, President Trump is giving money to substance misuse more than any other president. And sadly, that's because he gave any money to substance misuse. He's the first president to actually direct money from the budget to substance misuse. And I said, why are we applauding this? Why can't we say, because it was 8 billion, which for those may sound like a big number, but that's spread out among 50 states, all of them getting it equally. And our budget is trillions of dollars, right?
Yes.
So I said, why are we not able to say, hey, what is equivalent of about half a penny? It ain't good enough. This is it'd be like giving the coronavirus half a penny, right? I mean, it's just not good enough. And the person said, that's not how we do things. We have to applaud this money. And I was like, I'm going to skip that session because I don't believe in first off, I don't believe in applauding that president anyways. But second off, I think it's okay to say to someone, I really appreciate you doing this. 8 billion is, like I said, it's 8 billion that wasn't there yesterday. So thank you. I need you to understand that that's nothing. That is nothing compared to what's needed here. And especially when our defense is getting $1 trillion, I think you can cut a little bit more from that and give it to the people who are struggling. So I'm not willing to applaud. It's like how this year Joe Biden was applauded for saying that people struggling with substance misuse deserve love. Yeah, we do. You know what else we don't deserve? A president, unfortunately, in Joe Biden, who is the reason why so many young Black and brown Americans are in jail. He wrote the crime bill. And so it's like, yeah, man, I feel you. I really appreciate you saying that about your son. How about other people's sons? How about other people's daughters? We need to be going beyond. We need to be willing to say, God, you got to put your money where your mouth is.
Right. Definitely. Wow. Awesome story. So my next question here is, what did you have to do to overcome or bounce back from your lowest points? Can you list all the resources that were applicable to that?
Well, the night that I hit rock bottom in that dirty truck stop motel in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, what I needed was sort of the moment to mourn. I had just checked myself out of this long-term care facility because I wanted to get off my medication. My therapist didn't want me to. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm right. I think I have a misdiagnosis. The only way I'm going to get better is by getting off this medication. I got to get out of here. But here I was a day later, 2 days later, and I was feeling more alone than I ever felt. And so I had sort of come from this incredible high of leaving this place, believing in myself, to this incredible low in a 2-day span. And so what I needed was that moment to say, okay, this is horrible, but now you're going to go forward. Now you're going to go back up from here. And you've reached the point you never thought you would be. But the good news is it's not getting any worse. This is as bad as it's going to be. So that recognition for me was huge. I also am just so incredibly lucky that I went to live with my grandmother and grandfather in a small town outside of Sedona, Arizona. And my grandmother is a saint of a woman. She's still my best friend. And, she was willing to let me basically do nothing other than just try to survive over the next couple of months. There were days where she came into my room crying at the amount of pain I was in, mentally, physically, spiritually. I was just in a horrible place because detox is rough. Yes. And the detox I was going through was called step down detox because I was on so many medications that if I just stopped all of them at one time, I would have literally died. I cold turkey would have killed me. So I had to do what's called step down, where you take a little bit less and a little bit less. And unfortunately, unlike cold turkey, where it's horrible for a couple of days and then you're good, mine took months of that feeling. It was awful. And she was just my cheerleader, my best friend, my support system. I couldn't have got through it without her. So I really have to thank her for that.
Okay. Wow. All right. So my next question is, what are three things that you wish you had available when you were at your lowest point?
Yeah. Well, I could say number one, someone who had been there who could hold my hand. And that's why I do the coaching. That's why whenever I go on interviews, I say, please reach out to me if you need anything, because I've been where you are. You can't get any lower than attempting suicide twice in a 2-day span, and then going through overdose. So, I've been there. So please reach out if you need someone to talk to. Not even, yes, I would love to be your coach, but also just to sit there and talk to you and tell you it's going to be okay. That's number one. Number two, my family was supportive to an extent, but they didn't understand. And I think that we are making that progress, talking about these things. So sort of a societal awareness and people doing what you and I are doing did
Right.
not exist 10 years ago.
That's true.
And so doing this now is just so incredibly important, because we're making it possible for people who are struggling to be able to say, see, there are people who understand.
Yeah.
So that's number two. And I would say that at that lowest point, honestly, being somewhere other than Johnstown, Pennsylvania, I rag on Johnstown a lot, and it's a very small, kind of dirty industrial town. It's just not. I'm sure there are wonderful people there, but it's not where you want to be on January 2nd when you are completely alone in the world, right? I want to be somewhere where I can call on someone. I can say I need help, not in the middle of nowhere, sitting in a truck stop motel, eating a Pop-Tart for dinner because the gas station next door is the only thing open. So anywhere else, a spaceship to get me out of Johnstown would have been number three.
That's good. That's good. So, Mike, one of my next questions is, so what words of hope can you give to our listeners?
Well, so I would say, kind of harkening back to what you and I were just saying, that it is getting better. Yes, on a grand scale, it's almost depressing to see these baby steps, because you're like, we have literally a marathon to run and we're arguing over, should we go 2 feet or 3 feet, right? So in that sense, it's very demoralizing. But in the cultural sense, we are making incredible progress. I couldn't do what I do 10 years ago. It just didn't happen, right? Now, I live in Charleston, South Carolina, where the stigma around these things are still just ridiculous. But I'm moving to Philadelphia, where people talk about these things openly. And so there are areas where we have turned a corner. And we as a country are getting there. A couple of days ago, the House voted to legalize cannabis, which is incredible. I was arrested for this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right?
Right.
And now here we are, the people, like the old rich white men that we were all raging against are the ones pushing for cannabis to be legal. It is incredible how far we've come on that. So recognizing those wins gives me hope. And it also allows me to say to people, I know it may seem hard right now when we still in some areas can't even talk about these things. 15 years ago when I was arrested for just having weed on me, I never would have believed that a guy on the House floor would be wearing a pot leaf on his mask while voting to legalize cannabis. So
Yes.
we are making progress.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So now we're going to switch into actually, before we do that, I wanted to ask you a question about your podcast. So how long have you been doing that podcast?
Yeah, so I started the podcast in early February of this year. And I started it because, I saw the writing on the wall that this coronavirus was going to be as bad as they said. And unfortunately, it's been worse. So I knew I needed a way to get this message out there if I wasn't going to be able to do my public speaking during the year of 2020. And so I started the podcast, and I've been really lucky that it's taken off to the extent that it has. Now, I also don't want to minimize the hard work it took to get that. Yes, luck has been a big part of it, that people have said yes, and that I've had incredible guests, but also I was fortunate in the sense that I was able to devote myself to this because my normal job was being taken away from me. So I've
Right.
spent, instead of this being, let's say 10 hours a week, as it probably should have been, there were weeks where I was given 30, 40, 50 hours to this thing, growing it, working on my craft, that kind of thing. And so, yes, luck is a huge part of it, but also I don't want to give people the impression that podcasts are easy. As you know yourself, they are so hard. And to make it good is even harder.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, congratulations on your podcast. I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
And so we're going to switch to the next segment of this interview. This is more, I consider the fun segment. Yay, exactly. Because it's about music.
Yeah.
So with that said, as you can see behind me, there are some books.
Yeah.
The book is called The Music of My Life. And basically that's my story about my journey with bipolar. Basically, and I talk about music therapy and how it's very helpful. So my question to you is, what type of music do you like?
Oh, man. Well, we should do an entire episode on this. Right before we came on, I was listening to Sia. I am a huge pop, like just kind of pop, and if you want to call Ariana Grande and Sia and Justin Bieber, like, yeah, it's all pop, but then also they, occasionally guys will rap or slip into R&B or whatever the case is. So sort of that corner of the music world. I got to especially throw out Ariana Grande because her album Thank You Next, I think, is one of the best mental health albums out there. Also, Kesha is like that. Kesha's albums are almost all dedicated to mental health, and I really love her for that. She's sort of my big get. If I can get her on my podcast, that's my dream. I would love to interview Kesha.
That'd be amazing.
I'm sorry?
No, I said that would be amazing.
It would be. I would love. She has a new podcast, and it's incredible. So, definitely a big fan of pop. I grew up on sort of two camps: hip hop. I've been a hip hop head my whole life. I think that I grew up on Common, Quali, early Kanye. So guys like that. Watch the Throne, I think, is an incredible album. Kanye and Jay-Z, and I was a big Tupac and Biggie fan. I think Biggie's Ready to Die is one of the greatest albums of all time. But also the Beatles. I actually have Here Comes the Sun tattooed on my feet. I got that during my darkest days, and my wife and I walked down the aisle to two different Beatles songs when we got married a couple years ago. So, definitely a diverse taste in music. I'm also a big jazz guy. I have about 800 vinyl collection. That's been my number one baby most of my life. Been collecting since I was 16. And I would say probably 20% is the Beatles, another 20% is jazz, and the rest is hip hop and pop and rock.
Amazing. You're so eclectic. I
really,
love
the only
that.
thing I don't listen to is country. I like some good bluegrass, but I can't get into country. It's just, quite frankly, it's a little too white for me. I've never lived that life, and I can't really identify with it as much. So props to them, but I'm not a big country guy.
Okay. So with that said, if you were to think of a song that best describes your journey, what would it be and why?
Well, so I've been giving this a lot of thinking since I first responded to you. And Here Comes the Sun is the one I said, and I think that's a great one. And, obviously it's very personal to me. I literally have it tattooed on my body. So that's a big one for sure. That's the song my wife walked down the aisle to when we got married. I walked down the aisle to All You Need Is Love. So those two are definitely important. As far as my journey, though, I think the Suicides Hotline song by Logic, and there's another guy who's dedicated a lot of his work to mental health. A lot of people listen, we listen to songs, we don't really get the lyrics sometimes. And Logic literally released a song, and the title is the Suicide Hotline, 1-800 whatever, and it's all about how there's a person who wants to commit suicide, and Logic singing them like, I want you to be alive and that kind of stuff. And so it is. We just had our wrap of 2020 on Spotify, and that was my number 3 listened to song in the last year because I think it's so powerful. But the other answer, my last one, is Rockabye Sweet Baby James by James Taylor. I have a very personal connection with that song. He actually wrote that song while leaving the same long-term care facility that I was in. The second verse of that song is, all about, the Berkshires are beautiful in the fall with 10 miles behind me and 10,000 more to go, which is a saying in recovery, right? We've made it this far with 10, and not only that, I stayed in the same room he did in this long-term care facility. So there are times that I'm already feeling a little more vulnerable when I hear that song. I just start bawling because it's like a perfect reminder of him and I both literally were in this terrible spot and have made it, going forward.
Amazing. So what would you say? What does music do for you with your mental health? What would you say it does for you?
Yeah, man. Everybody who struggles with mental health has their sort of plan when things are rough, right? And for me, I know if I'm in a rough spot, putting on the Beatles always helps. I also know that if I need to sit there for a minute, putting on a song that helps me sort of be present and be in that mood, like I've already mentioned, "Rockabye Sweet Baby James," and the Suicide Hotline song by Logic. And also, the opposite too, when I want to get pumped up and I want to feel better, putting on something, I'm a big fan, like I said, of hip hop and my vinyl collection. If I need to, I can go over there and pick out anything that I'm feeling, whether it's a good Bob Marley song or a good folk song. I'm big into this guy named Gregory Alan Isakov, who is a folk singer from Colorado, who is fantastic. People like that. Or if I want to put on some Kesha or some Ariana Grande, I've got it all. So it really is a constant companion to my life.
Cool. That is awesome. I love it. So with that said, how can we stay in touch with you? What are your social media handles?
So I am Jay Shifman, which is JayShifman, or Choose Your Struggle on every social media. My podcast is Choose Your Struggle. My website is jayshifman.com. Although if you type in chooseyourstruggle.com, it will direct you to jayshifman.com. So those two terms, you can find me anywhere. I actually have the patent on Choose Your Struggle. Not the patent, that's not the right word. The what do you call it?
Trademark?
Thank you. The trademark. So there are other people who use that term out there. I'm not that asshole who's going to go demand they get rid of my hashtag. But if you search Choose Your Struggle and you go down 3 or 4, you'll find the podcast and all my stuff. So
awesome. Okay. So with that said, I want to thank you very much, Doug. Sorry, not Doug. Jay. Thank you, Jay, for taking their time to come on this interview. I think people are going to definitely enjoy your stories. There was a lot of nuggets that you can take from it. So with that said, and to all you resilient minds out there, until next time, please subscribe to us on all our platforms and don't forget to rate the show and leave us a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Also, join the community of resilient minds and sign up for our monthly newsletter at CleoniCrawford.com. Be sure to grab a copy of my book, The Music of My Life, on all Amazon marketplaces to get to know me better. And if you can think of one person that will receive value from today's show or connect with Jay's testimonial, please share it with them. Feel free to take a screenshot of this week's episode of the podcast and tag us on Instagram. You can tag myself at Only Cleoni or Resilient Minds 365 and today's guest at Jay Shifman. And remember, mental health is not a death sentence. Despite your illness, you can strive, you can thrive, and you can live a life of abundance. Until next time, I'm Cleoni Crawford, and I'm signing off.